Hello, hello. Good evening. Please let me know if you can hear me. If you can hear any music, if you can hear my voice, if you can see me, blah blah blah, all of that stuff. Just to check if everything is working the way it should be. I will wait until I see somebody answer in the chat. Perfect. All right. Happy to hear that. Well, welcome everybody to the class. It's a bit of a smaller class tonight. We have one or two people that will be checking the stream afterwards because they're in a different time zone and probably working or asleep right now. So there will be plenty of space and time for questions because it's a small group in the chat. Let's see. So I like to start out in Lightroom over here. I have a couple of images open, and for me it's like either or. I don't really mind which image I work on tonight. So if you guys have a preference, let me know, because then I can work on the image that you prefer, that you would like to see. It's always nice to have more like a simple image, so I have a bunch of pretty clean shots here. And yeah, if you have a preference, just let me know. For a simple one, yeah, so I'm thinking one of the bottom row images because they're just very straightforward. Man with flower, yeah. It's also a good one, also pretty simple. 1 or 7, I think this is 7. Let's have a looky. So this was pretty good. Enough texture to work with. It's always good. I always check if it's not like too easy, you know? I want to be able to show something, but this will do. This will do. So let's work on this one. Composition is a bit weird because I shot it on a tripod, so I couldn't move around. But we can fix that. We can fix that. So we're starting with the basics in Lightroom, and it's just really just the very basics. You can see here that I've already worked on this image a little bit, so I'm going back to the import. You can see I already made some adjustments here. And basically what I do when I import my image to Lightroom, I always do two things that are very important. I go to the camera profile. So when you go to develop, and this is the same in any raw editor, camera raw, like all that stuff. If you go to your camera profile, you will have a bunch of options here, and what Lightroom does is it will set the camera profile to Adobe standard. And you can immediately see the difference between camera standard and Adobe standard. So yeah, Adobe likes to apply its own color profile to images, and I think it does this in Lightroom, in Bridge, and in Camera Raw. I'm not exactly sure, but I think, if I remember correctly, it does. So it's always good to check, like, okay, what's my camera profile at? And is that what I want? Because usually you want your image to look the way you shot it in camera, which means you need to apply the camera's color profile to it. And here I have it in my list because I've added it to my favorites, but if you can't find your camera profile settings, you just click here on these 4 little squares. You click and you can scroll down to camera matching. And here you will have all the profiles that match your camera. So in my case, I have a Canon 5D and it has these profiles. and I will just click standard because that's what I shoot in, and then I will know that my image has the right color profile. That was a lot of words for a very simple thing, but just so you know the how, what, and why. So next thing I like to do, I like to go all the way down to lens corrections, and I always click these two. I always click remove chromatic aberration. It's just a good habit, because if there is chromatic aberration in your image, which is like that colored fringing around the edges, it's good to just click this as a habit so that when it is there, it'll be worked on and it'll be removed. And then I always click enable profile corrections, and you can already see what this does is it removes the vignetting around the edges of my image. And what it usually also does is it sets this at 100. As you can see now when I turn it on and off, you can see I'm sorry, I'm feeling a little sick, so sometimes I will space out a bit, hopefully not too much. You can see the distortion, the lens distortion. You can see that change when you enable or disable this profile corrections box here. Now I'm setting my distortion to 0, my distortion correction to 0, because I shot it at 105 for a reason. I wanted to stay there. But here, if you want, you can play with that distortion and see, you know, what you like. But I'm setting it at 0 for now, because I like the way that looks. Well, you can see when you just go through this slider here, you can see it does change the way your model looks. So those are the two basic things that I do to every image: the lens corrections and the profile corrections. And then what you can do is you can play with these sliders, because I think I shot this image at 5400. You can see it's quite warm, which is nice. But I like to start with a bit of a cooler image when I work in Photoshop, so I tend to slide it down just a little bit. And then I also played with the highlights and shadows just ever so slightly. But I bet you guys know all of that if you're here. But it's just little things you can play with to make sure you have a really nice clean starting point. Because that's like the most important thing here. We want to start with a nice clean slate so that everything we want to do in Photoshop, we have like a nice image to start out with. Actually lowering the exposure just a tiny bit so that there's no blown out highlights on her cheek or anywhere. Just like to check up close. Everything looks nice. So from here, I'm going to say edit in Adobe Photoshop, and it's going to open our image. And there she is. Step 1 when you're in Photoshop: duplicate your background so that whatever you do, you always have your original underneath everything, so that if you mess up, if you make a boo-boo, don't worry about it. You still have everything the way it should be underneath the mistakes. So first thing I want to do here with this image, I actually want to work in a 4:5 ratio, purely because the rest of the series is also in that ratio, and this image is gonna fall a little bit outside of the series because it's getting a different edit, but just for some consistency, and it just works well on Instagram. But you know, I like to play with my crop, and you can see I have an overlay of a golden spiral. You can change your crop overlays here. So you have rule of thirds, you have the grid, diagonal lines, triangle, golden ratio, and golden spiral. It's kind of personal preference which one you want to choose. For portraits, I find that the rule of thirds, the golden ratio, and the golden spiral work quite well. For me, the golden spiral feels the most organic and it feels the most painterly. Like if you manage to get your portrait into this golden spiral properly, as you can see, like most of our model is within the spiral here in this shape. So I know that this will work for most people, and this composition will just, you know, it'll be nice to look at. But as you can see, we have some empty space here that needs to be filled in. We have this nice little box here that says content aware, and if we check that and we click enter now, the crop tool will automatically fill in that space for us. And I bet you it's gonna look a little messy. Yeah, like I said, it's gonna look a little messy, but we can work with that. So I'm grabbing my patch tool here, and I'm just grabbing this little bit and taking it over here. Just grabbing a space that is a bit more clean. And then we're gonna work on how dark it is in a minute. You can see there's also some bumpiness in the background here. So actually what I want to start with now is cleaning up the area around the model so that I have a nice, that I can easily clean up the background, and I have a nice like even background, because right now, as you can see, we have different textures and it's a bit of a mess, and it depends on your image how messy this is going to be. In this case, we got a bit unlucky and we got a bit more of a mess than you would usually get, but it's easy enough to fix. So I'm starting out kind of messy just with that patch tool. Now I'm going over to my clone brush and I'm just cloning away this little bit of a bump in her shirt. So I'm taking the edge of the sleeve here and I'm just cloning that down so that it looks like nothing even happened. Beautiful. So what I'm doing now is I'm going over to my magic wand tool and I'm clicking up here. You can see the select subject button, and I'm just clicking that and it'll make an automatic selection of our model, which in this case is just really easy because it's just, you know, just a model on a clear backdrop. So it's really easy for Photoshop to make that selection, and it saves us a lot of time just to do this simple selection. So I'm going to say select inverse because I want to select the backdrop and not the model. So now we have a selection of just the backdrop. I'm gonna say right click feather and feather it by a radius of 2 pixels just so it's a little softer. And then I'll make a group and I'll click the mask icon over here. And you can see we now have a group with a mask, and the mask is only applied to the background because that's what we're working on right now. So I'll call that group BG for background, quick and easy. And I will make a new layer inside that group. And then I can just go and grab my brush tool, set the flow to maybe 10%, select our background color, and just brush over the areas that look messy. And just try to make a nice even gradient. So make sure you don't use a very high opacity brush because you want those colors to blend and you want your background to look nice and even. Now you can see when we turn this on and off, it looks very nice, very clean, and a lot less messy. So I've left this side darker, but you could also go in with making a new layer and setting that layer to soft light, and then using a little bit of a gradient like so, and then you can lighten that edge up. And you will see some banding happening here, these weird artifacts and stripes. But once you merge your layers, those will typically disappear. So I don't worry about those right now. I don't actually want my backdrop to be that light, by the way. I'm just demonstrating, like, hey, this is what you can do. You can go back and forth, and you can play around. So now I'm going in with a radial gradient, and I'm just adding a little halo behind her head. I think that's cute. And then I'm gonna lower the opacity of this layer to like 45%, I think. Turn that on and off, and you can see just a quick little something to make everything look a bit more sleek. And you can see now when I merge these two that banding will calm down a whole lot, and that's just because the more layers you have and the more stuff you stack on top of each other, and more artifacts can appear. And if you merge everything together, those artifacts will typically no longer be visible. So that's just basically step one, is a quick cleanup of the backdrop and fixing the composition and the crop and everything like that. If there are any questions during the process at whatever point, just feel free to throw them in the chat, because sometimes I go a bit fast, sometimes I go a bit slow. So if you're ever like, then just feel free to chat. All right. So what we want to do now is we want to clean up the edges a little bit. You can see some of these hairs flying everywhere. So I'm actually just going in with the spot healing brush tool, and I'm just going over some of these hairs that I feel like are just a bit too much. Just a little. I don't want to delete them all because, you know, we got a bit of wind going on. We got some flyaway hairs, and that's fine, and that's natural. But there's a limit, you know? There's always just a few too many, and this is just a nice, quick and easy way to get rid of those few too many, because it will just automatically fill in. I make small strokes so that the computer doesn't have to do too much thinking, and it'll be easier, and it usually looks a bit neater. All good until now. Okay, good. You never know, you know? Yeah, I just want to make sure that people know. You can always ask me anything. That's that for now. So we've done a basic cleanup, we've done our composition, we've done our crop, and this is what we've got so far. So now I'm gonna go into the skin, and just step one of the skin. I will start with a round of frequency separation. And if you don't know yet, frequency separation is basically splitting up your image and having one layer that is color, shadow, stuff like that, and one layer that is purely detail and texture. And by splitting them up like that, you get a lot more control over your image, and you can really like refine a lot more things without messing up texture or messing up color, because you're separating it, so you're making it easier to work with. And I have a frequency separation action here, which I need to put this in my web shop and then give everyone that participated a code so that they can download it. It might take a day or two, but I'll keep you updated on when it goes up. But yeah, so I have an action for it. But I'm going to take you through the steps now, just so you know how to do it without the action. But I do recommend making an action for it, because it's a lot of steps. So step 1, we're gonna duplicate our top layer 2 times. We're gonna call one of them low and one of them high, because we have a low frequency for the colors and the shadows and all that, and we have a high frequency for the texture and the details. So I'm going to turn off that high layer first, and I'm going to start on the low layer. And the low layer is the easiest one. We just go into filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and we're going to find a blur radius that works for the image. And basically what we're looking for is, as you can see here, you can still see too much detail. And if you go over here, there's not enough detail. You kind of need that in-between spot of like where all the lines are kind of blurring and everything's kind of blending together, but you can still see where everything is. That's what how I like to describe it. So for this one, I guess we would be at around a 16 pixel radius. And listen, sometimes I'll do one and I'll notice that it's not going super smoothly, and then I'll just do it again with a lower or a higher radius. It's also a bit of a trial and error, but you will know at some point like, oh, this is the correct radius, because you'll see what it does properly if you've done it properly. So, but this is kind of what we're looking for. So once you found this, because it'll be different, like if you have a really close-up portrait, you need a higher radius of pixels. Whereas if it's further away, you only need 7 or 8, for example. So it kind of depends on the image. So for this one, I'm going to go with 16. I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going into my high layer. I'm going to breathe. My breath is like here. Needs to be lower. Okay. So select layer high, and then we're going to image. Apply image. And then here in the layer thing, we're gonna select low. And then blending, we're gonna select subtract. Scale should be at 2, offset should be at 128. And it should kind of look like this, just gray, but you can see all the detail and texture, but the rest of the image should be just grayed out. That means you've done it correctly. So we click OK. And then we set this layer to, where is it? Linear light. And then we'll put the high and low together in a little group, and we'll call that little group FS1 for frequency separation 1. And now you can turn this entire group on and off. And if you've done it correctly, you won't see any difference. If you turn this group on or off, you will just have the exact same as before. So that means you've done it correctly. So we can continue. Now I like to make a copy of my low layer and then right mouse click and say create clipping mask. Because in this case, if I make a mistake on my low layer, I can just erase it and I will have this other low layer underneath. So I have something to fall back on if I mess up. And I'm going to do the same for my high layer. I'm going to duplicate, but you can see because of the crazy texture we have going on, that doesn't look so good. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this layer to normal, and then we're going to say create clipping mask, and then we'll be back to looking the way we want to look. So this is just so we have like a little fail-safe, something to fall back on if we do make a mistake. Now it kind of depends on personal preference if you start in your high or your low layers with this, but I like to start in my low. I like to start with the colors, the shadows, the blending of everything. So that's what I'm going to show you. I work in my low layer with the mixer brush tool. For the mixer brush, it's very important that you have the correct settings, because the mixer brush is basically like if you're working on a painting and you have a wet brush and you have a clean wet brush and you take that through your paint basically, and every time you put a clean brush down, you will only work with the color that you put it down in, if that makes sense. And that's kind of what we want with these settings as well. We don't want to take one color over to another area, so we need to work on these settings. So for step 1, I have an oval brush. All the brushes I use, I set to an oval shape. For me, it just feels more natural. I also work with a pen and a tablet. It just has a more natural feel for me. So something you can try out because it might work for you as well. So all you need to do is just drag the arrow into a corner, squeeze these two little balls together, and you will have an oval shaped brush. Then over here you need to select clean brush, because again you want your brush to always be clean when you put it down. And then here you need to select this little thingy right here with the little swoosh through the brush, which basically means it'll stay clean. And then here we have wet 80, load 60, mix 55, flow 10, blah 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 blah. Make a note of the things at the top, write them down. Once you put these settings into your mixer brush, you won't have to ever do them again. They will just stay the way they are. So it's just a one-time thing of just like putting it in, and then you can just work with it. The flow can be anywhere between 5 and 15%. You can kind of play with that, but I kind of always leave it around 10. So then I zoom out a bit and I start putting my mixer brush down in an area that I want to blend. And basically what you're doing is you're blending edges together just to soften everything. And at first it'll be kind of hard to see because it's very subtle, but you know, that's what we want. We want to be subtle. We don't want to do anything crazy. We just want to make everything look nice and blended and soft. So now when I turn this on and off, you can already see what I've been doing. And it's so important here that you make small strokes and you stay in that area and you pick up your brush after every stroke. So you keep the high level on when you do your low. Yes, because if I turn my high levels off, I will just have a blur. And I don't want to see the blur. I want to see what it does underneath the texture. So I want to see the complete picture, not just the blurred picture. You always want to see the final effect basically on the complete image. So it's very important, for example, when I'm working in a smaller area, for example here, that brow highlight, and then I'm going down on the eye. So I don't want to drag this up to here, you see, because it immediately turns dark and gray. And I don't want to drag this up to here because it lightens up the whole eye. So you really need to pay attention to where you put your brush down and where you drag it from there. We have a model with a little bit of a scar here, and that's actually something that I'm not going to remove. I'm just going to refine it and make it look like in tune with the rest of the image. But stuff like that I tend to always keep in because it is more of a defining feature. Like, it's not like a pimple or something, like a weird texture on the skin. It's actually something that's there and that's part of her face. So that's something that I will typically leave in. And then there's other things like this little birthmark here that's almost completely covered in her foundation. And that's something that I would probably be like, yeah, that can go, because clearly it's very light and she covers it with foundation, so she doesn't care if it's visible. So yeah, you can kind of make your own decisions in that regard, because it's very personal, of course. Always zoom out, turn on and off so you can see what you've been doing. And here I can see that I've lightened her cheek a bit too much. So I'm going in this darker area here and dragging some of that back up. It's better. And you can see I'm just very softly using small strokes and just smoothing out that skin, making her look like a little painting. I usually keep it up when I see 2 degrees. Oh, yeah, I I don't think I could do it without my top layer, because I just really need to see, you know, how everything reacts together. So in the end, it's about the complete picture. Alright, when I think I'm like happy with my low layer, I'll go in and I will go to my high layer and I'll select my clone stamp tool. 100 opacity, 100 flow. And I'll start targeting some blemishes and things in the skin that I want to get rid of. And again, here it's really important that you stay really close to the texture that you are working with. For example, the texture under the eye is very specific, and I cannot take this texture and put it onto the cheek because you can see it's different than the texture around it. So you really want to work in small areas, and really if you're working on the cheek, take texture from the cheek. So every time I will hold Alt, I will select a texture that I like, for example over here, and I will put it down here. So I stay really close to the area that I'm working on, because in a face there's so many different textures. The texture above the lip is different than the texture underneath the lip, and the cheek is different than under the eye, and the forehead is different than the jawbone. It's all just different textures. So you really need to be mindful of that so you don't get any weird texture changes and stuff like that. Do you use patch tool? Yes, I go back and forth between patching and cloning. Usually around edges, like for example here, I would grab a patch tool because cloning can leave, like if I were to clone here, you can see it discolors everything. And with the patch tool, not so much, it looks a bit cleaner. But I like the brushiness and the control that I feel with the clone tool. It's a bit of a personal preference thing as well, I think, but for me, the clone tool is like my main thing when I work on texture. Because I also like using it at a lower opacity. For example, if I were to work under the eye, I could set the flow to 4%, grab this texture here, and just very softly go over the texture under the eye. And then I could just soften it ever so slightly without taking it away completely. Whereas with the patch tool, I could never do that, of course. So I think the clone brush is a bit more versatile and it gives you a bit more control than the patch tool. And here, I mean, with this step, you can spend so much time doing this. You can go into as much detail as you want. But of course, for the purposes of the workshop, I'm not gonna take too long. I'm not gonna take too much time doing one step. Just because I want to show you all the steps. And not sit here for 4 hours doing one thing. But just know that I might be doing this really fast right now, but if you're just starting out or if you're really like focused on perfecting one image, you don't have to do this as fast as I'm doing it. Because I get that sometimes, especially when I do an in-person private workshop, I get people that are like, but how are you so fast and I'm not that fast? And it's like, it doesn't matter. I'm not always as fast either, you know? Just do stuff at your own pace. And again, I'm just zooming out and turning this on and off just to see what I'm doing. I'm going back in. Lots of different textures. And this model has quite good skin, but she also has a lot of foundation on. So it can become a little bit powdery and cakey. It'll be nice. We were in a lockdown in the Netherlands where our makeup artists weren't allowed to work, and it's gonna be very nice to have them all on set again, making sure skin looks perfect. But yeah, no, this model has really good skin. It's not that big of a deal. I just like a natural glowy skin more than a powdery skin. As you can see, I'm really targeting super small areas. Because it's all about the details. And here I'm going back in with a lower opacity. And just softening the texture around the eyes ever so slightly. Staring at pixels. Alright. Cloning from the wrong area. You can see immediately when the texture looks all wrong, it means you accidentally cloned from the wrong spot. Hairs here. Alright, zooming out, turning this on and off. Yeah, that's looking nice. Nice and clean. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, for efficiency's sake, and to speed up my computer, I like to, if I've done a frequency separation, I'll merge the layer and flatten it. Because the fewer layers you have, the smaller your file is, and the easier it is to work with, and the, you know, less heavy it'll be for your computer to work with the file as well. So after I've done my frequency separation, I like to go in with a dodging and burning step. So I'll make a new layer and set it to soft light. Call it DB soft, dodge and burn soft. And then a very helpful step here when you do your dodge and burn is to make a black and white layer on top of everything. And it's just a temporary layer that you're going to remove after you're done. I'm gonna drag the reds into the darker zone because most blemishes are in the reds and the yellows. So when I drag those down, you can see some things appear that you didn't really see before. So with this layer on, I go into my DB soft layer with a regular brush. Again, that oval shape, my brush opacity is at 100 and my flow is gonna be at 1. And I'm just gonna use that brush to fill in those textured, blemished areas. And I'm using a very soft hand because you can see you're doing very little. So I'm just using my white brush because what white does on a soft light layer is it'll lighten. And if you want to darken an area, you'll use a black brush. And even at 1% flow, I find it a bit too much, so I'll set it at like 85% or maybe 80%. Because it'll allow me to be even more subtle. Just gonna erase this bit because I think it was just a bit much. And this is a step that can take a lot of time as well because it's very precise and very fidgety. So you can spend quite some time on it. But, you know, as much or as little as you want. It's your party. Back with the eraser, soften this a bit. So you can see I'm really targeting small areas here. And just working on anything that looks rough, messy, blemished. But we're keeping all the skin texture intact. Because we do want the skin to still look like skin. We want to make it look natural and nice. Brightening the eyes a little bit. You can see she's wearing contacts, so we'll work on that after this. So zooming out, turning this on and off so we can see what we're doing, and I can see that I don't like what I did here. And like this also, like it's no biggie. If you've been working on an area and you look back and you're like, oh no, I don't like what I did, that's fine. You can just go back in and erase it. It's not a problem. And then it's also good to look at it without the black and white layer because you can see there's a lot less visible texture when you turn that black and white layer off. So yeah, don't get too hung up on that black and white. But again, I'm kind of like speed running this right now. But I'm also looking at like the areas that are already brighter, and I'm giving them a little extra pop of brightness just to get ahead of myself. Alright, turning the black and white off. Turning this on and off. And you can see she's starting to look very smooth, very painterly, very pretty. I'm going in a bit closer so I can work on the edges of that contact lens and the lines in her eye. And we'll go in and we'll fix the rest of the eye in a different layer, but we can make a nice start here. Alright, zooming out. You can also see here that the black eyeliner isn't completely black, so I'm actually going in with my black brush now. And I'm just gonna make it a bit, put the flow at 4% and just brush over that black eyeliner and mascara line, just so we have a nice black line. Go back to white, do a little swoosh through the eye, brighten that a little, go back out. Basically just checking every area. enough? Yeah. I think I'm at a point where I'm happy with the way the skin looks. So I'm deleting my black and white layer because she's no longer needed. What I want to do now is I want to work a little bit on the lashes and the eyebrows. So I'm going to create an empty layer and call it small hairs, because why not? I'm taking my brush and I'm going into my brush tiles and I'm going to turn shape dynamics on. And I work with a tablet, so I have pen pressure control. If you don't have this, I mean, that's fine. It'll just be a little less refined, because what pen pressure does is so you see the shape, it'll be tapered at the start and at the end, and if I turn this off, oh, it won't be, it's just a straight line. And you're working with a very small brush, so it's not extremely noticeable, but it's nice to have it because it does help make it look more natural and more like hairs. So basically what I'm doing is I'm drawing hairs, I'm filling in the eyebrow a little bit, which is a step that I almost always do. Even if someone has full brows, there will always be something that I'm like, oh, let me add some more hairs here and there. One thing flashing lights are good at is blasting through eyebrow hairs and making them a lot less visible. So be sure to look at the directions that the hairs are growing in and brush in the same direction so that there's nothing unnatural or crazy going on. Go over to the other brow for a second. See, because this brow has less light on it, you can see it looks a lot fuller, so we don't have to do as much to this brow. It doesn't have to be filled in as much. So that's nice. So then I'm going over to the eyelashes, so I'm just using my color picker. So if you don't know the shortcut to pick a color, when you have your brush selected, you just click Alt. Hold Alt and click on the color that you want. This is basically just black, but still. I'm gonna draw in a couple of lashes because she's wearing a fake lash. I just want to make sure that it blends nicely with her own lash and it has a bit of a pop. And eyelash hairs are very tiny, so you can use a really thin brush in between and make them look a little fluffy. Zoom out, turn it on and off. Yeah, that's cute. Go to the other side. A lot of Asian models will have more straight eyelashes. So it's something to keep in mind if you have a makeup artist, or if you're doing makeup, or your model's doing their own makeup. If they wear a false eyelash, make sure to curl the lashes that are underneath so that you don't have straight lashes with curled lashes on top, if that makes sense. It's not just Asian girls who have that, but it's more common. It's just nice to have them all curled and kind of in the same direction, you know? I also want to fill in this eyeliner a little, so I'm taking my flow down and just going over here, kind of straightening out and filling out that eyeliner. So right now it's just a little too messy and reflecty for me. And really, if you're gonna go into this amount of detail, I do really recommend using a tablet. If you don't have one, I have a review on my website, on my blog, of the one I'm using, which is really good at like a really nice price. So do recommend checking that out if you're interested in getting a tablet but don't know what to get, or if you think, well, Wacom is pretty expensive. And I have another option if you read my my blog post. Alright, turn this on and off. I think I'm gonna set it at 90%. Yeah. See, it's the little things, the details. They're important. There's a little thing here. I'm going into my frequency separation, my top layer. I'm just using that spot healing brush on the scalp to get rid of a few thingamajiggies. Alright. Alright. I'm just gonna save real quick. So now we're pretty much done with our base. Our model's skin looks great. Her eyes look nice. The eyebrows and the eyelashes look groomed. We're getting somewhere. So now I want to go in with another dodge and burn. But this isn't a soft dodge and burn. Oh no. This is the dodge and burn where we get to play a little more. So we make a new layer and we set it to overlay. I do this so automatically that I forget to tell you what I'm doing. So I make a new layer and I set it to overlay. And I use my black and white brush, and I use white again to highlight, black to contour. I turn off my shape dynamics because if you want to create a nice highlight, what you need to do is you need a center. Let me demonstrate over here on the gray. You want to create a nice highlight. You want a brighter center that's blowing out. Kind of demonstrate it here. The center is bright, the edges are blown out. That's the natural highlight. But if you're working with the shape dynamics, you get a very different look because it tapers at the edges. And you can see it starts to look more choppy and rougher. And I want this, the very soft, smooth look. And I don't want the choppy edge. That's not what I want. So when we're working on our dodging and burning, we turn off the shape dynamics that we did use for the hairs. And here I'm just checking, like, okay, where are the existing highlights that I can exaggerate? So I'm not creating new highlights. I'm not like creating a highlight where there isn't one because I don't want it to look unrealistic. I don't want to change the way the light hits my model because it doesn't make any sense if I were to highlight like this entire cheek. Like how? Where's this light coming from? I can't do that. It doesn't make sense. So just keep in mind, like, okay, where are the highlights hitting my model? How can I make them pop? And I like to go like a little overboard and then lower the opacity of my layer because it's easier to build up a highlight and really like go very, very far with it because then you can make a nice blown out detailed highlight and then you can just lower the opacity of the layer and make it look more natural. All those eye reflects can use a little boost. It's always pretty. Okay, going into black and working on the shadows a little bit. Basically what I'm doing with that is I'm creating more depth in my image. Of course I do that with highlighting as well, but highlighting without contouring is just not as effective. So you do want to do a bit of both. And I keep switching back and forth between my black and white brush and going into a certain area and just working on that area. quick way to switch colors, by the way, is the X tool on your keyboard, in case you didn't know that shortcut. It's a nice one if you have to switch very often. I'm highlighting the hair a little bit, giving it some extra glow. Is this... I was gonna say, I see choppy lines. My shape dynamics was turned on. What did I just say? I don't want shape dynamics. Turning this on and off. Trying to lighten that cheek a little bit, but every time I do it, it's too much. Okay, that might be it. Yeah. Sorry. And here you can kind of, you know, go into any amount of detail that you like, that you feel comfortable with. See, sometimes I go over the edge of the face just to get the right placing of a highlight. And then I can just erase it again, and that's fine. Grab my mixer brush for a second. Mix this out. Ooh, that's a lot of white. Erase, erase. You can see you can get kind of lost in a certain area or a certain detail that you're trying to perfect, but no harm in that. Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. I will always like go over certain areas multiple times. On and off. And then I'll set it to, I think, 75% when I'm pleased with it. Yeah, that's cute. Just, ooh. Accident. Just a bit of glow. Can do a bit more black here. Sometimes I need to remember that there's people watching me, otherwise I'll just keep going back and forth endlessly. Alright, I want to go over to the next step. So, oh, ooh, accidents happen. That's why we have the undo button. I'm just going to add a little bit of a highlight to the fingers. I don't want them to feel left out. Very important, like when you work on the skin, to work on all of the skin and don't leave anything out. Not that you have a super smooth face and then some really rough hands or some untouched arms, you know, that's just, it's not very nice. Alright, gonna save. think I overdid it a little bit with this one. So I'm gonna erase just a tiny bit. Or did I? Let's see. Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's more natural, huh? You see, it doesn't all have to be perfect right away. As you can see, I do this every day, sometimes for the entire day, and I still need to go back and forth, check on myself, make sure I don't make any weird mistakes. So don't feel like you have to do it all perfect the first time. Alright! Now what I just want to do is I want to get rid of the redness and the colors in the eyes. I'm going back to this FS1 layer. Flow at 1%, and I'm just going to grab this white over here. I'm just going to brush through the eye very softly. And just grabbing whites that are in the vicinity of the area that I'm working on. And I don't want to like completely get rid of it because it's quite unnatural if an eye is like completely white. But I do want it to look a bit cleaner. So that's all we're doing. Starting to hurt. Too much pen holding today gets you a finger cramp. Alright, folks. So now we're done with skin. But she's also got a shirt on, and as you can see, there's some hairs, there's some lint, there's some dust. So what we're gonna do a quick fix for that. We're gonna duplicate this layer. The layer that has our model on it. And we're going to go to filter, noise, dust and scratches. And you can see now I have a radius of 23 pixels and a threshold of 9 levels. And you can see that there's still texture in her sweater. But the texture of all the messiness that was on there has disappeared. And that's exactly what we want. So you kind of want to play with these sliders because it's different for every fabric, every texture, anything that you work with. So you need to kind of play around with them until you have like something that you like. But okay, her skin also looks crazy and we lose all the detail, but we just need to make a mask. So we click the mask icon here and we go Control I to invert the mask. And then we just use our white brush to brush over her sweater. And not over the flower, just the sweater. And that'll make life a lot easier for us because we don't have to manually go over every little bit of dust or whatever on the sweater. Turn this on and off to check. Looks good. Oh. Yeah. I'll just merge it with our other layer and then I'll go over, because here you can see there's some redness. And I'll go over that with my spot healing brush. Some of the larger spots that haven't been removed, I can just manually get rid of. And then it's fine. It just looks a lot neater. So we save again. Now we want to do the finishing touches. We want to get into the... Yeah, you can use it on any fabric. And what it does is it removes lint, dust, cat hair, skin flakes, just stuff like that. just a quick and easy way, instead of having to remove everything manually with, for example, the spot healing brush, you can just do it with the dust and scratches tool. It's a nice little trick. Alright, so now we're going into the last two steps. I'm gonna go to the top of all of my layers. I'm gonna work on color toning now. I want to tone my image, I want to change the vibe, change the mood, and I'm doing that using adjustment layers. And you can see over here I have the adjustments box, and I can select any of these adjustment layers to start working on my image. And I like to start with selective color, so I'll click it and a new layer will appear. And I have all these sliders here, and here I can basically manipulate every color in the image separately. And I like to start with my blacks and start playing with those. And you can already see by just manipulating the blacks how much of an impact that has on our image. And I kind of just go through all of the colors and play with the sliders a little bit. So basically, if you're working in the yellow slider, if you go into the minus, that means it'll be the opposite of yellow, so blue. And if you go into the plus, you will be working with yellow. So here it's good to see, like, okay, which tones are in my image, which colors can I work with. So usually skin will have a lot of pink and yellow, so that's nice to keep in mind. And I tend to also here just go a little overboard, go a little far, because I can always go back in, because it's a layer on its own. I can just lower the opacity of the layer. You see when I turn this on and off, put it at 70%, turn this on and off. It already sets a very different mood for our picture, which is nice. But you know, we can zoom more. We can, for example, make a curves adjustments on top of that. And make a little curve. Have a little fun. In the curves, I also like to play with the color curves. For example, in red, if you drag it down, you get green. If you drag it up, you get red. But if you make a curve, you can have red shadows, green highlights, or the opposite. So you can really play with these and really manipulate all the colors that you have. Which, if you know my work, you know I like color. So... You know I like to play with these. And because this image is quite basic, like it's very neutral, there's a lot you can do with it. Like you can go so many directions with it, which is really nice, but also dangerous because you can... It can be hard to know when to stop, because you're like, oh, this looks nice too. Oh, this also looks nice. Oh, but I also like this. And then it'll be endless. Ooh, eh. Okay. Kind of like this. It gives it a very like retro vintage feel. Set that to like 75. Super cute. Super retro. Okay, now, of course you also have levels. Levels is the same principle as curves, but curves is more powerful, more potent. Levels is a bit more a toned down version of the curves. But I do like to play with both and just see what I get. And you can use one of these, you can use 10 of these, you can use none of these. It's like whatever you like. And when I'm done, when I'm pleased with the result, I will merge them all into one group. So let's say, okay, I'm done. Select them all, add them to a group, call the group toning. And then that's also nice because now if you have a bunch of images in the same series, you can just drag this little group onto the next image in the series, and that way they will look the same, which is always a nice plus. Easier to work with. Now we have this nice retro vibe going on, so I think it will be nice to add a bit of grain to our image, just a bit of a retro texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty layer and set it to overlay. And then I'm going to grab my color tool, color picker, and I'm going to go into the code here. And I'm going to type 818181. And that is the code for neutral gray. And if I now fill in my layer with that neutral gray, it will have no effect. You won't see anything because I've set it to overlay. But now if I add a grain to this layer, the grain will be visible. And that's basically what we want. We don't want the gray to be visible. We just want anything that we put on top of that gray to be visible. So we can go into filter, camera raw filter, and we can use the grain effects in the camera raw filter. And I like to kind of zoom in so I can actually see my grain. And just use these sliders to make a grain that is to my liking. It can be a bit rough and big because I want that like vintage vibe. So I think that's nice. Add a bit of vignetting, click OK, and bam. Now if we turn this on and off, I hope the quality of the stream is good enough that you can actually see the grain that we added when I turn it on and off. If not, just trust me, it looks nice. It looks nice. So that's that. Now we've added our effects. So if we turn this, we just call this group effect. We turn this on and off. You can see what it did for our image. It really just like set the tone and defined what our image should look like. Now one last thing I always like to show in my workshops is how to add a bit of a background texture. So I'm actually going to grab, what will I grab? A floral could be cute. Could also be a bit much. I think I'll grab a marble texture. Drop that here. And it's just gonna be very subtle. Whoop. Come on, buddy. Oh. Press the wrong key there, and now my thing got all weird. Let me try that again. Okay. Turn it around. Hold Alt and make sure it's covering the entire image. Now, of course, we do want our effects to also be on our backdrop, so we're going to drag this below the effects, and you can already see when it's on top of the effects versus below the effects, it looks different, so it's important to do that. And then we're going to pick a layer style, so I'm just going to cycle through these layer styles until I see one that I like the look of, and we're gonna ignore the way it looks on our model, pretty much. But we're gonna look at the way it looks on our backdrop. And I don't really want to lighten our backdrop in any way, so I'm trying to keep that in mind when I'm picking the layer style. So basically the one that worked best here is multiply. Multiply. Because it doesn't lighten our backdrop and it doesn't darken it that much either. So we can, if we set this to 50% for example, we'll have some texture but we won't have a lot of darkness going on. which is good. But we can still see there's some yellow, and I don't want yellow in our backdrop, so I'm going to adjustments, and let's go into hue saturation and just use that hue slider and that saturation slider and get to a point where there's a color that we do like. And here it looks a lot more neutral. Actually, I'm gonna desaturate it a bit more. Bam. Okay, but now it's still on our model. We don't want that. But as we've seen before, we can very easily just grab our magic wand tool and click select subject. Oop, couldn't find a subject. Yes, I need to select the layer that my subject is in and then click select subject. And then you see we have a selection of our subject, but we want the backdrop to be selected. So we go select inverse, feather by 2 pixels to soften the edges. I'm gonna make a group again, and I'm gonna put our backdrop in that group and call the group BG background. And then I'm gonna click the mask tool, and then bam, our backdrop will be behind our model. I think it can be a bit less opaque even, maybe 40%. And it can also have a bit of a blur because of course it makes sense that our backdrop will be blurred, especially when you already see that the hair here is out of focus, so the backdrop also needs to be out of focus. So I'm gonna right mouse click and say rasterize layer, because if the layer is not rasterized, I won't be able to use all the filters. So I'm rasterizing it, so I can go to filter, blur, lens blur. And as you can see, I use this more often, so there's already like a blur setting in there that I like. And it's just a bit of a blur, just a little bit. But you can play with these sliders until you get the blur that you prefer. Click OK. And there you see, now we have a nice subtle blur. Setting it to 30%. And if you want, of course, you can go back into, because now you have a group again. So you can, for example, create anything in there you want to add to your backdrop. You can add a halo behind your model if you want. You can darken the edges. Like, you can do anything you want here, pretty much, because you already have that nice selection. I do want to go and check all the edges to see, for example, here, you will see that our selection is missing a tiny bit. So we'll go in there and we'll draw it in. Oh, actually that's from our previous selection. Shame on me for not checking, because like our first step, remember, was also a selection to fix the backdrop. I'm just using the clone brush really quick to fill that in. Okay. So checking, going around the hair here, making sure there's nothing weird going on. It's looking good. Zooming out, saving, and then as a very last step, pretty important, because again, like I said, you can get artifacts, banding, some unpleasant things going on if you have multiple layers. So what I want to do on top, if we select our top layer, we go Control Alt Shift E, E for effort. No, that's not true. Yes, it is. E for entertainment. Not A, but E. Okay, sorry, I'm so tired. So we do that, And then that will create what is called a stamp visible. Yeah, it's called stamp visible. So it'll make a layer of everything that's underneath. It'll create one layer on top. And you can see when we turn this on and off, there's actually a slight difference in the colors and in the banding on the edges. So you see, once you blend everything together, you will get a nice smooth finish. And then we can save, and then we're done. And then that's it. If you have any questions, ask them now before I leave. We can have a look at the before and after here, next to each other. So you can see, like, there's a dramatic difference, but our model still very much looks like herself. So the difference is more in the vibe of the image and the finish and the refinement. Do you always crop at the beginning of the process? Yes, I do. That's usually my first step, because I can't, it doesn't feel right until the composition is right. So composition and crop is like step one. Sometimes I don't need to crop, but I just want to make sure that before I do anything else, that my composition is good. Will the video be available to rewatch? Yes, you can use this link at any time. I just ask you to not share it with anyone else. Because, you know, if anyone else wants to see it, they can buy the next retouching class. I might actually have a recorded class on my website soon, so that I won't be doing them live anymore, but I'll just have a recorded version. But for now, I'll be doing some online classes in the future, I think. But yeah, you can watch it back whenever you want. The link is yours. Are there any more questions? I would love to see if you work with it. If you're gonna get to work with everything that you've seen tonight, feel free to tag me in any of your results or in your Instagram stories, because I always like to see like what people get up to, so that if I do see it, I can repost it or whatever. I always like that. If there are no further questions, then I am going to go downstairs and have a cup of tea. And I'm gonna wish you all a very good evening and good luck trying everything out, and have fun, most importantly. Just have fun, play around with it, and yeah, I'll see you all somewhere on the internet, I'm sure. Thank you. Have a great rest of your week, guys. Bye bye. Thank you for joining.